All right, let's. Good morning, everybody. Let's start. Mm. Hi. Um, how's everybody doing?
As well as can be expected
Yeah.
under the circumstances.
Well, we have a similar today. So it's bar mitzvah.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Huge morning. Go.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Mazel tov.
All right. Shalom. Shalom. Hi, guys. Shalom.
Good job.
Now people online, okay? We'll raise a lot. Not fit.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that.
Good to see you. It was 20 years ago this Shavuos that I met Reb Zalman.
Wow.
Remember your first impression?
I always love looking at video of you with him dancing with it. I think
Yeah,
I've
that
sent it to you.
was Simchas Torah. Yeah, that was
Oh, that's Simchas Torah, right?
Simchas Torah when he had hakafas and he asked everybody to dance, you know, in the energy of the sphere for that hakafa.
Right. I love watching you. You're so young there.
Wow. Well, the reality of the morning.
He looks pretty young to me.
Yeah, yeah. I knew him when.
It was really true. I was looking at it, my kids and my wife, and it's really young. But I do remember my first impression of Reb Zalman. My first impression, Reb Zalman was someone recommended that I should go and meet this person after I was after I had a very powerful 2 years in a modern Orthodox yeshiva called Chavavei Torah, and after 2 years of learning halacha, it was clear that I was I didn't think I was going to be a rabbi. And a friend of mine said that you should meet this rabbi, and so I said sure. And they told me the name, and I went back and I realized that I had so many of his books, but I had not even read them. And then I went up to Elad Chaim, which was up in Accord, New York, back in she was in 2004, and someone had told him that you know, to meet me. He was curious, but I think in general liberal movements are curious about people who are once Orthodox or who have, you know, an Orthodox background. They feel like they're getting someone on their team, so it's a little bit like, you know, like you're getting a player. And he was interested, curious. We had, you know, so I went and I met him. My first impression was him, and I walked into Elad Chaim, and he stood up and he was walking towards me. He was walking with a cane. He had an injury. He was wearing knickers and suspenders, and and he had these big, beautiful. His hands were. Yeah, he was just so beautiful. He was a strikingly beautiful person, and warm and welcoming. And I think I shared this the other night with the people that I was sitting with, and yeah, one person can change your life. One person change the direction of your life. It depends. If you're going really fast, it doesn't take a really powerful, like when the faster you are, a pebble can change the direction of your life. I'd slow down pretty, you know, to a halt. So it took a boulder, and he was a mountain. He was a mountain of a person. So
Beautiful rabbi.
yeah. So great. So Shavuos, Bamidbar. So we're going to start, Caroline, if you could put the Birchat Torah, and we'll all say the blessings, and then we can start learning. All right, everybody. Baruch atah Asher Kiddushanu. So this formulation, by the way, of this whenever we're about to engage in a sacred act, we have this formula. And it says, Asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav, who has sanctified us with his mitzvot, God's mitzvot, God's commandments. But in Chassidut, the mystical meaning is that we have been made holy through God's mitzvot, meaning that God also does mitzvot. Mitzvotav means his mitzvot, not just his, meaning that their origin is in God's command. But God also does mitzvot. It's his mitzvot because he's also doing them. So whenever we're doing something, we imagine that the sacred, the Holy One of blessing is also with us, learning Torah together, pulling up a chair. Let's learn. So we're about to enter into the book of Bamidbar, the fourth of the 5 books of the Torah. And it works out in the calendar that we're always beginning the book of Bamidbar right around the time of Shavuot, when we're about to receive Torah. And this juxtaposition, which is slightly coincidental, because the book of Bamidbar is not about receiving Torah. It's far from it. The themes of the book of Bamidbar are very much, it's very hard for scholars to understand the warp and woof of the book of Bamidbar. The book of Bamidbar is essentially the Israelites leaving Mount Sinai, leaving the locus of revelation, and beginning their journey towards the promised land. But a whole lot happens between Sinai and the end of the Torah, when the Israelites are ready to enter the promised land. I mean, the book of Bamidbar has a very flimsy structure. It's very, very difficult to discern the architecture of the book itself. But one thing is for sure, there are at least 7, according to scholars, 7 rebellions. So in many ways, the book of Bamidbar is the book of rebellion. It's the book of the story of the Israelites after having received Torah, resisting the movement forward that is implied in the book of Bamidbar. The book of Bamidbar is let's go, and everything about it is let's not go, right? And so there's really a tension in the book of Bamidbar about we know that in the book of Exodus, when the Israelites immediately left Egypt, there were a number of moments of complaining, right? We know that. That's for sure. They were mitonenim. They complained about water. They complained about the lack of meat. They complained that they wanted to go back because there were better watermelons and other things in land Egypt. But in the book of Bamidbar, we have 7 moments of rebellion. Of course, we have the rebellion of Korach, the cousin of Moses. That was the great rebellion, right? The great rebellion that was put down. And in many ways, the book of Bamidbar, as Everett Fox writes, is the story of the hero's journey. The hero's journey, of course, classical, whether it's the Odyssey or any other mythical structure, is a story of a hero who meets resistance and obstacles and overcomes them, right? And so one might look at the book of Bamidbar as the hero's journey, but there's something anti-heroic in it, because the book of Bamidbar actually doesn't end with those who had rebelled overcoming their obstacles. It ends with them being told they can't enter the land, right? So the hero's journey ends in this sense with a sense of futility, that even though the generation that left Egypt, we were pulling for them, like, come on, guys, you can do it. You're just, it's just another unique feature is that the obstacles are not external in the book of Bamidbar. They are internal. Their rebellions are all rooted in faith and the lack thereof. All of their rebellions are rooted in fear and in resistance to change. Right? It's not like in the book of Shemot in Exodus they met Amalek. That's a scary moment, right? So that we were like, okay. But in the book of Bamidbar, there are no such moments, right? The moments are all internal, and then it eventually leads to the great rebellion, which is the rebellion of not wanting to enter the land, to turn back, sending spies in, and then believing them even though God had promised them the land. And so in that story, they wind up. The rebellion itself becomes the source of their demise, and at that point, the book of God says enough. I'm going to try with the next generation. And so the story about we're going to go back to Revelation, because again, the book of Bamidbar always is around the time of Shavuot, and Shavuot is the time of receiving Torah. Shavuot being Pentecost, which is this coming Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But I just wanted to give this general overview of Bamidbar, because in some way, and I don't want to spend that much time on this, but I wanted to say this last night, but decided in the last minute not to say this. The generational problem in the book of Bamidbar is not solved by trying desperately to keep those people from rebelling. I mean, the effort is made, that's true. But in the end, the book of Bamidbar says the project will go forward without you also. And that's not the kind of thing that anybody wants to hear. It's certainly not the kind of thing that, like, in my mind, I was thinking a lot about where we are right now, and I'm constantly being asked, what about the next generation of Jews here in North America, which is a huge problem at this moment. It's been a problem for a long time, but in a different way. And the project will go forward without the next generation also, meaning this generation. Like, the question, of course, will be, right, how much energy will be spent before we say, you know what, enough, right? And there should be tons of energy spent. I'm not, God forbid, giving up on anybody. But if the book of Bamidbar tells us something, it says that the promised land, meaning in this case, literally the promised land, is a project. It's God's project, and the people will either get on board with it, or God will find another generation that is more likely to be on board with it, right? And sometimes generational problems are deeper than you need 40 years in order for them to being worked out. So, but thankfully you're sitting in the room, and all of us are together. We're going to receive Torah this coming Tuesday night and Wednesday and Thursday. And I want to talk about a unique feature of receiving Torah that many of you will be familiar with, but let's look at these sources and maybe learn something new together about what this meaning is. So let's share. I'll share my screen. And okay, here we go. You look at the famous, wink and a smile of Revelation, which is known in the tradition as Na'aseh v'Nishma. Go screen. So you're going to go to the view and make sure that it's not two-page scrolling. Okay, there we go. Ready, everybody? So look at these verses. We're in source 1 on the screen in front of you. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And oh, that's really good. Okay, good. In Parshat Mishpatim, Vayivo Moshe v'yisaper la'am kol divrei Adonai v'kol Mishpatim, and Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of God and all of the rules. Kol echad vayan kol am, and the entire people, the nation, answered with one voice. Vayamru kol advarim asher divrei Adonai na'aseh. All of the things that God has spoken, all of the words that God has spoken, na'aseh, we will do. Yeah, everybody clear on that? So far, so good. Do. Verse 4. Moshe is called to be Adonai v'Hashkem b'boker, and then Moses writes all the words of God. Wakes up in the morning. He then built an altar at the foot of the mountain. 12 pillars or monuments for the 12 tribes of Israel. Verse 5, and right, I didn't translate all of it on the left side, but there, right, these young members of Israel, they offered up on that altar, right? It was a big party. It was a huge party. This is the way they partied in the Bible. They had a barbecue. They put up animals, and okay, great. Verse 6, the same thing. Then Moshe takes the half of the blood from the sacrifice. I'm sure this is all of great interest to us. He placed them into vessels, and then half of the blood he threw onto the altar. And then this verse 7, which is really, right, verse 3 and verse 7 now are in conversation, right? In the beginning of this reading, the children of Israel said, everything that you told us, we're going to do it. And now Moshe takes Sefer HaBrit, he takes the record of the covenant, the book of the covenant, and he reads it again in the ears of the people, and they said, Kol asher diber Adonai, these are exactly the same words as in verse 3. All that God has spoken, and then one naaseh, we will do, but then one more word, v'nishma, and we will faithfully do what it, like, or obey. But naaseh means to do, nishma in biblical Hebrew means to obey. But the way that the rabbis understand it is that it's an additional quality or additional condition or additional approach that adds on what came before in verse 3. In verse 3, they said we will do, but now they say we will do, and then we will understand. The Shema, it's very unclear what it adds. Is it just kind of an emphasis? We will do it dutifully. That seems to be the way Edward Fox translated it, faithfully. But the rabbis didn't hear it that way. The rabbis heard it as understanding. We will do, and then we will understand. And that's the classic understanding of this two-step dance in the tradition. That there is a like there's something unique about this formulation, and we're going to look at the Gemara. The Talmud will unpack this for us in source number 2. And so, just so you get yourself chronologically, the Bible, like the Talmud, is considerably after the time of the Bible, right? We know this. The Talmud is written in Babylonia, compiled somewhere between the 5th and the 8th centuries, in kind of an ongoing style of compilation. The rabbis who are living in Babylonia, also the rabbis living in Israel at the time as well. Then, and the Talmud is basically an ocean of law, folk story, expansion of the text, trying to understand. Some of their expansions, homiletically or interpretively, are very colorful and fanciful, and they give us a worldview that we're still living in. Right? It's not right. That worldview is a real, the real inheritance of our last 2,000 years, conceptually, behaviorally, and so on. So here's a beautiful drasha, a homily by a certain Rabbi Simai. Right? He says like this. At the time when Israel said, we will do before we will hear, see that? What's he saying? Like, first of all, there's something about the order here. Why is the order unique? We will do, and then we will hear. And hear means understand in their worldview. Why is that a uniquely jarring, or what about it strikes you? It's like, why does the order matter?
Because usually people want to understand before they do something.
Right. The assumption is that human behavior is motivated by understanding. So, on some level, the order here, at least, again, if both words mean the same thing but just two different words for the same thing, then the emphasis is just prose. It's just prose and poetry. But for the rabbis see in this addition, and not only addition, but where it's placed, not before naaseh, we will do, as radical. Now, I don't know. For moderns, we might say that the order is not a good order. In other words, the fact that we don't understand, we do it anyway, has led to a lot of very bad things in the world, right? Like just taking an order and saying, "Oh, sure, whatever you say, I'm on board," right? But for this Rabbi Simoy and other rabbis, this is actually a magnificent moment, crowning moment for the Jewish people. Wow. Look at what he says. He says, in that moment when we will do before we will understand or hear, there were 600,000 ministering angels came to each and every one from Israel and gave them 2 crowns, one each, one for we will do and one for we will hear. Getting crowns from angels is a big deal. I mean, right? No, I'm serious, right?
Yeah.
So it's a crowning moment. It's a yeah, he thinks it's a good thing, yeah?
Mm.
Maybe we'll get back to why crowns later, like what the later rabbis understand in crowns. Why crowns? Like, why do angels have crowns? Why would they get a crown? Okay. Seems like there's something majestic, regal, royal about receiving a crown, and this is somehow like a transcendent feature of their nature, as it were, right? Okay, well, look at Rabbi Lazar. Another rabbi chimed in. Said, "B'sha'ah shekdimu Yisrael na'aseh v'nishma." In the moment when the Israelites gave precedence to we will do over, we will hear, a heavenly voice, a herald, right, claimed, "Who revealed to my children this secret, which is employed by the ministering angels? Who, right, this is a great phrase, Mi gila lebanai raz zeh. Who revealed to my children this raz, this mystery, that the angels are mishtam shibo, that the angels are utilized. As it says in the verse in Psalms, he quotes a verse in Psalms that seems to imply that it seems to have the same exact order that the angels do God's word and then listening to God's voice. So, right, they do what God asks and then they listen. There seems to be a pattern, right? There was a certain heretic who saw Rabbah engrossed in his study while the fingers of his hand were under his feet, and he ground them down so that his fingers spurted blood. Crazy story. Is okay, you know what? Let's skip this story. It's a crazy story. Let's skip the story. So what's happening here? What's happening in this moment? We'll come back to these sources. Okay? So what's happening in this moment? We're also opening up for people online as well. Yeah, what's your name?
Norm.
Norm. Okay, Norm's in.
The emotions, the anger or whatever, there's a fear involved in acting. This is partially my own projection maybe, but
You don't have to, no qualification necessary. I think all of us speak from our own experience.
so the feeling is so strong, it's taking over the thinking part. It's just going into the action, which the thinking perhaps has prevented them from taking action. Maybe there's timorousness on the part of the
temerity, like they're
fear.
Yeah, their fear.
Of, so I mean, it's just I was reading a book of like an Hawthorne where there's a woman, House of Seven Gables, who's very much like she needs to be thrust with all her feeling has to press and propel her to act. So that's what
you're hearing that.
basing that on.
Yeah. So Norm is saying that he's hearing this emphasis on action as a strategic way to bypass the thinking brain or the analytical brain that in many ways can leave us in a state of paralysis. So here, this two-step dance am I paraphrasing you correctly?
Absolutely.
And so like here, there's a contractual relationship taking place, and the Israelites are saying, listen, God, right, we're afraid of commitment, but we're just going to jump in, right? Jumping in, and then we'll figure it out later. But we have to jump in first, otherwise our emotions won't be compelling us to action, but will be fueling a kind of a brain that is constantly teasing and looking and right. Just do it. Exactly.
Reebok,
So just do it. A little Reebok or Nike or whatever. Just do it. Right.
Yoda.
A
Are you
little
saying,
Yoda.
are you saying fear of commitment or fear of God? What are you thinking?
Fear. Just fear, right?
No. Well, the way, but not fear of God. Like commitment. I'm saying, like I don't know the story.
Yeah. No, I understood that it wasn't. I don't think it's a fear of God. I think it's like the fear that in general will inhibit us from moving forward is what's operative here, and this is kind of counteracting that. I want to go to Beth, who had her hand up, and then come back into the room. Beth.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom, Beth.
What I'm struck by in this sequence of doing and then hearing, it implies a tremendous amount of trust, which is really remarkable considering what they're witnessing at this moment. It reminds me of when I took yoga classes from my favorite yoga teacher. I would show up on my mat. I didn't know what she was going to have us do. And it's like, lay it on me. You guide
Right.
me. I'll do whatever you say. Just lead me to Bertie.
Shamati. I want to come back to the trust piece. Let's hold that like in the center here. I'm gonna come back to that. Jesse, yeah.
Seems to me, and the way the rabbis were saying it was so beautiful that you'd crown them with the angel, that it's that moment of love. Like somebody says to you, "Would you do me a favor?" And you don't know what they're going to say. You say, "Of course, anything." Right? It's such a gift to be able to give. And this is God asking. So like, wow, I get to give. That's the most beautiful thing in the world.
So
Of course, you would say, of
right.
course.
So what I love about both what you're saying and also what Beth is saying, and I want to come back to this, is that it's not, we can't take it in the abstract that there's a commitment here before there's understanding. It's in a relational matrix. But if a stranger comes along and says to you, it's your yoga instructor, presumably your yoga instructor is someone trustworthy, and so you're willing to go with it. I mean, there is a question why a friend would ask you to do something without telling you the reason. Presumably there's a reason for things, and why not give the reason first to build that trust? But here, it's, I want to, so there's trust, there's that is allows us to surrender. And then there's also the question of, is there actually a reason why it is in this case or in other cases we must do before, right? So those are separate things. So like in your case, Norm, you're saying there's a reason why God is saying, or the children of Israel say, we will do, and then we will hear. And that's why the rabbis in the Talmud say it's a big mystery. Like they're even the angel, it's an angelic mystery, right? Angels have this profound awareness that we need to do before we understand. And here we're saying that even if there's an absolute necessity to do something before you understand it, for whatever reasons that we might get to in a moment, that still can't happen unless there's a relationship of trust and faith and something
Love.
and love that's there, right? Okay. Tony, and then I'm gonna go to source number 3. Go ahead, Tony. Go ahead.
Just briefly, think of Hamlet and his saying, "I'm sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought," and he sees this play and he says, "What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? And I have real cause, and I'm just paralyzed." So Hamlet is a kind of quintessential example of somebody who's just paralyzed by his own thinking. And
Yeah. So look at source 3, and then we'll get to David and Jay and a couple more people in line. Let's just look at source 3 to underscore, and I really want to continue to tease these two things apart. There's some kind of wisdom in this approach to life, and then there's also its shadow elements and how to kind of avoid the shadow elements, or what are the preconditions, right? Not in every situation. So let's look at. This is Sefer Chinuch is a source that is in the genre of Jewish literature that seeks to give reasons for the mitzvot, like the reasons why we do the mitzvot, like the rational reasons for commandments and ritual acts, right? Which is ironic, because what he's about to say is quite interesting, given that I'm bringing it here as a source for doing things without necessarily knowing their reasons. It's just meta. Okay, source number 3. Ki adam nif'al kefi pe'ulotav. Human beings act upon, they act, is as acted upon according to their actions. And their heart and all their thoughts follow after actions that they do, whether good or bad. Even one who in their heart is a complete sinner and all the desires of the heart are only for evil, if their spirit should be enlightened and they will put efforts and actions to persist in Torah and mitzvot, even if not for the sake of heaven, meaning even if for the wrong motivations, they will immediately incline towards the good. And from that which is not for its own sake comes that which is for its own sake. For the hearts are drawn after the actions. Now that phrase became in in the universe of Jewish intellectual discourse, he became known for that phrase, this author. Acharei, right? Hapu'ulot, nimshachim halevavot. Is that after your actions, your heart will follow. This isn't like an ancient debate, and it's also like a modern, postmodern debate about what motivates people. Should you spend years of psychoanalytic couch surfing in order to understand what motivates you? Is that if it's one thing, it's your mother. If it's not one thing, it's your mother. Like, so, or is Skinner or is it a Skinnerian approach? Like, is it reward and punishment? Right? Does it not matter what? Like, it doesn't matter to me. Go to Child Mind Institute or any of these other schools of around children and learn that reward and punishment works very well with the young mind, or not, depending on whom you ask. They don't care. So, like, this debate is literally mapped onto so many debates, political and psychological. Are human beings fundamentally shaped from the outside in or from the inside out? And nobody's going to answer it, by the way. But I mean, let's just give it up. It's like a koan. Like, it's what the sound of it doesn't. No one's going to finally figure it out. It's a Mobius strip. So the thing here is that in this rendering, then Norm's like insight and others' insight is that, or like Tony was saying about analysis, like the children of Israel are given this contract with God. Moses reads it, and the children of Israel say, you know what, we're going to do it, and then we'll let it shape us as we do it, as we will become what we do. And if we were to spend all our time trying to understand it first before we commit, we'll never get there. And so we're gonna, right now, of course, this could become extremely dangerous theory. Like, it's just a very, like, if one's approach to listening to authority is whatever you tell me I'm gonna do, we wind up in Stanley Milgram's famous, obedience to authority, right? And it's entirely same. This is the conversation, right? That is often where this goes in the shadow element of this. So for that, I want to talk about relationship and the relational, like a relational matrix. First, I'm going to go to David, and then we'll come back to Jay and see where we go. Or Jay's not there anymore. Okay, David, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to, in support of Norm, we came off of last week, Barsha, with some pretty heavy, it was pretty heavy if you reward and consequences, especially the consequences. So I think there does seem to be reason to fear here. And the word, faithfully, we're about to get into, going forward textually, we're about to get into a lot of tests. God is always testing faith. So, I mean, I'm kind of looking with Norm at this in that context.
That because fear is so operative here, that the Israelites jump in, right? They didn't have to in that way. Or maybe the rabbis, it's interesting, like the text doesn't necessarily invite all of the things the rabbis are struggling with. Let's just, like, for a moment, zoom out. Why would the rabbis who were invested heavily in understanding the Torah read this moment of the book of Exodus and map it onto this dichotomy between understanding and doing? I mean, maybe because the Torah doesn't give real reasons for things, right? Only in a number of places. The Torah is essentially very didactic in that way. But by the time the rabbis and the culture of the rabbinic project emerges, they're heavily invested in trying to make sense of the whole thing. Like, so all of a sudden, it's only with the emergence of the ability to ask why, that the question of the dangers of asking why emerge as well. It's only like in the universe of the Torah, there's no fealty question. Like, as you said very well, David, like at the end of the book of Leviticus, it's like you're either going to listen to what I'm telling you to do, or it's going to be really, really bad for you, at least according, right? Like the Torah has no qualms about the things that would befall the Jewish people if they're not loyal to the dictates of the Torah. And so by the time the ratification of the covenant happens, right, or it happens before that, but right, it happens in Exodus, but certainly, you know, I think if there's a property that emerges in the rabbinic culture that makes it that there's the possibility of paralysis through analysis, and there's a possibility of rejection when mitzvot don't make sense, and so there's a need to see this as a great, to valorize obedience in this way, without saying that you don't have to. Like the beauty of the second verse 7 in chapter 24 is that it also adds the dimension of understanding, but it just places it in the right order, and that's what the rabbis love. It's like we're in, but we're still gonna be in. We're all in. We're gonna be like like in the famous Elie Wiesel trial of God. We're gonna put God on trial and ask all kinds of really intense questions, but then we'll daven. Then we'll pray afterwards. So there's this way. So I think, David, I think you're right that you can't, like Leviticus certainly is there, and this becomes like an important piece of the rabbinic culture. I thought, and Jay, and then we'll come back into the room.
Shabbat shalom. Can you hear me?
Shabbat shalom. Yeah.
Okay, great. A quick aside, by the way, in modern social psychology, there's a counter school that argues not that we behave on the basis of our attitudes, but in fact, our behavior shapes our attitudes. But I also wanted to leave it to me to go dark on this whole issue, which you hinted at in terms of the dangers, in terms of Naseh v'Nishma, in terms of trust, in terms of love. But talk about, you talked about the dark side in terms of authority, and I want to put on the table a particular kind of authority. I mean, what do we have in this scene? We have 600,000 people who are at the edge of the mountain, who are afraid. They want an interlocutor. They don't even want to deal with God directly. There's a lot of fear. So we may also have the authority of mobs, of mob rule, which is another kind of authority where we're not thinking, we're behaving, and we're behaving under the influence of the mob.
Absolutely. I think that's not only is that legitimate, but I think that's borne out, that's the danger of which by the way might not be solved by the relational matrix, which I'm about to introduce. Did we just lose everybody?
Oh my God.
No,
Whoa.
Oh no. It's like looking at the screen went blank. Okay. And I want to let's explore that after we introduce the relational matrix, which might be insufficient. But anyway, yeah, totally. And like we can see fascists and neo-populists and populists and so on misusing this, and yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt that one can. It's so curious though that the rabbis, like it's not. Yeah, it's totally true. It's totally true. The problem in the text is that it's consistent in the text that you see God as an infinite, like God's power is readily present in the story, like just to be consistent within the story. So it's not hard to imagine people saying whatever you want because like we're like in the presence of the ultimate authority. Like it's not as though God's authority is, God's not the Wizard of Oz in the story, right? God is, like within the story's own understanding, right? It's happening. But of course, in the presence of orange-haired felons, it's also, it's obviously, yes, totally. It's like that's the problem with it. Yes, totally. Okay, yeah. In the room, and then we're going to go back to a couple more texts. Rachel, and then we'll move from Rachel to the back. So Rachel, go ahead.
So, at the point of sounding like a troublemaker.
You?
Yeah.
Rachel?
Surprise.
You're a truth teller. You're not a troublemaker. That's the wrong frame, in my opinion.
Truth is, I'm very curious as to what the rabbis who were discussing this, who were equals, they were the rabbis who make it into Sepharia.
Yeah.
Right. So these rabbis, what kind of power and influence over behavior did they assume would follow from their collective examination of strong and important moral issues.
Mm-hmm.
But did they expect that I sit here reading Safaria and say, oh, okay, I'm going to choose this because Rabbi so-and-so, who's my favorite rabbi, told me. I mean, where did they think they were going in terms of influence of humanity?
It's such a great question. I mean, it's such a great question. Just broadly, like, did the rabbis, were they as self-aware of their project as we might imagine them to be? Could they imagine the level of influence? Were they speaking internally, not assuming anything would be recorded? Were they self-conscious? I mean, those are all questions that scholars and academics and others have tried to parse out. It's certainly clear that the rabbis, the degree of rabbinic power over the populace is extremely precarious, right? Like, it's very clear that the rabbis over the last 2,000 years were perceived in retrospect to have much more power than they likely did. There were mechanisms, like in all of the pre-modern cultures, of shaming and social ostracization and so on. But for the most part, the people did what they wanted to do. And the rabbis would then write treatises and critique the people and tell the people to stop, like, one can follow the thread of rabbinic frustration with their people and read exhortations from them as telltales on the level of observance or the lack thereof. Right? So often rabbinic texts over the last 2,000 years would be exhorting the people, stop doing X, Y, and Z, or one shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, and you know that people were doing X, Y, and Z. And so, so again, like if you Shalom Aleichem and Fiddler on the Roof and those kinds of shtetl mentalities, right, were very homogenous, and social norms dictated so much, and there was so much fear about leaving the clan, especially given anti-Semitism and what it was to be left out. But the rabbis were if anything, what's interesting to me about the rabbis is not necessarily the power that they exerted, but the plurality of voices that they displayed. Like, it is almost impossible to find homogeneity within the Talmud. In fact, so much so that in the Middle Ages, it was assumed that one couldn't live their life Jewishly just by reading the Talmud alone, because it was just too heterogeneous. It was just these and those. And so eventually rabbis came along and said, people don't know how to behave, and so we better extract from the Talmud all of the legal decisions. Right? That was Maimonides' great project in the 12th century, which he was criticized for, and his books were burned for having the audacity to reduce the heterogeneity and the heterodoxy of the Talmud into something orthodox. Now, again, the rabbis had power, and the rabbis had power to do many things, but I certainly think that the question of rebellion and authority is a question it's a real question, and it's not, I'm not going to, allied over it. There were certainly rabbis who exerted power inappropriately, and so we have all those stories. But the rabbis had power, like they did have power. They shaped the right. They decided what was in and what was out, and even as I'm saying that there was great pluralism, there were things that they said are outside the pale. But that's because you have to have a line somewhere. And so I want to come back to the relational measures, but first we're going to go from Tony to Paul, to Lori, and then Wendy, and we'll do it quickly. Paul, go ahead.
On the subject of rebellion, it seems the elephant in the room here is the golden calf.
Yes.
And the following civil war.
Yes.
And so the children of Israel were rocked by this Holocaust.
Yeah.
And are now teetering and hearing the words of Moses. And so it seems entirely understandable that they would say, fine, they've just been through this, the worst experience of their lives, and maybe the worst experience of anyone's life. And
it's a small minority, though. I just want to say that it was a public spectacle for sure, but even the text makes sure to know that it was only a small, very small minority of people who actually were engaged in the golden calf. Just saying, but still.
Okay. But it was important enough for God to note it to Moses.
Right, without a doubt. Right.
There's something really bad going on.
And it's true, like what you're saying, that in the wake of that, it would be hard for anyone to then rebel again. Although they do rebel throughout the book of Numbers, but point taken that they were witnessing
Profound moment
a
of
moment
insecurity.
of rupture and insecurity for
Yes,
sure.
and so the do, and so a question, to Rachel's point is, it seems such a large object, this rebellion, in all different ways, that the rabbis are not dealing with this thing directly. Like that's, to me, seems the obvious answer to why do before here, because they've done a lot, and now they're ready to do something else.
So just I want to make sure I understand the point. So to you, the rabbis are not dealing with the elephant in the room or the golden calf in the room. Is that the golden calf? It's impossible to understand the imperative. It's impossible to understand their willingness to do and be obedient before understanding, unless you understand the cataclysmic moment of the golden calf as a preamble to it.
Right.
Did I get that right? Okay, great.
And causative agent.
And a causative agent, like right in the aftermath of that, we can inexorably leads to obedience, right?
Fine.
It's like
the people are saying,
sure,
fine.
no problem. I'm not going to say a word.
Until the next time. I mean, it doesn't take them that long.
Which is not altogether different from what David Kurtz was saying about the Bechukotai, the end of the book of Leviticus, right? The chronology here is but like just yes, right? If you're in the presence of an authority figure that is willing to right, if you see it that way, then it's not a secret of the angels. It's just what happens when you've been beaten down for so long, and then you just say you acquiesce.
Yeah.
This is not commitment. This is acquiescence. Right. Okay, or fawning. It's a way of saying like sure. Right. Okay. Yeah, Lori.
So I didn't really realize till this moment how this had been the doing and was a big part of my life. Like I remember in my late teens when I decided to go to Israel to go to yeshiva, and I remember consciously saying, like, how could I reject something if I don't just jump in? And I'm going to just jump in and do everything. At least, that everything was in my mind or whatever. And I did, so I did that for a number of years. And then at a certain point, I stopped and I said, like, what really is the purpose of tearing the toilet paper, or like, what is the purpose? And because if I didn't stop at that moment, I would have like totally left. And I go on this journey of being here and going, but I remember that I said, okay, when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to, see what moves me, and not in the sense of like picking and choosing, but kind of, but I wanted it to be more integrated, because at a certain point I felt like I'm like my inner self is being left out of the equation. So I don't know if that happened, but I really, the point that I've gotten to in my life, I guess, is that I really am in awe of people who really, it's at least it seems that they really, I mean, and I'm friends with some of these people, that they really follow this.
Yeah.
It's
So,
beautiful, even if
yeah.
I can't.
So I think towards the end, like in about 15 minutes or so, I really want to bring back what Lori just said and also like tie some of these things together, because I think you're expressing what you just said. It encapsulates a kind of the complexity of this idea, right? And its promise and also its pitfalls. Okay, so yeah, Wendy, and then we'll go forward. Yeah.
I think you can't help but notice the transition of the Israelites from when they first left Egypt to the moment where they were willing to just, with 100% faith and emunah, just follow without questioning, without fearing, without anything, and the growth of the people over that period of time. The other thing is, like, we know that this journey took approximately 40 years. But in the Torah, it doesn't list like this happened in year 10, this happened in year 20, So we don't really know at what time in the 40 years this occurred. Hence, you might have lost at this point at least 50% of the original people who left. So you have not necessarily the same people that were present at Sinai. And so hence that could also explain the change in the philosophy of the people to just have 100% pure emunah in Hashem.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a really, like an important point to bring that in. That this is maybe a developmental sequence and there's an evolution here in the character of the people. And that also invites thinking that maybe what the rabbis imagine as a very high level, structure of the mind, not Nishma as like an angelic structure, is really situated in like an arc of when it's appropriate versus when it's inappropriate, like that. And so that's also going to come back. Okay, so let's do one more text that connects this to, and then I saw it. Is it? I can't see. Is it Edel Asher Chaim? Okay, Marilyn. So let's do the text, and then we'll have another round of insights. Okay. So this last, I just want to read one quick text. It's going to be in your source sheet. It's source number 5, but I want to first let's look at source number 4 over here on the screen or in yours, just to get a sense of what's happening. We read the book of Ruth on Shavuot, and one of the traditional way of understanding why we read the book of Ruth on Shavuot is the story of Ruth is a story that takes place at the time of harvest. It's also because she's connected to King David, and King David is her great grandchild, and he dies on Shavuot. So there are a number. She's also a convert, right? So it's also all of the Jewish people became converts when we received Torah to some extent. So there's a lot happening with Ruth, but one thing that's much simpler in understanding why she's included is because of her relationship with her mother-in-law. So let's not look at the story here for a moment. Just listen to me for a second. So Ruth is the daughter-in-law of a woman named Naomi, and Naomi has 2 children, Machlon and Kilion, and they marry a woman named 2 women, one named Orpah, which was Oprah's original name, but nobody can pronounce it, so it's Orpah, not Oprah, but Orpah and Ruth. There's a famine in the land, and so Naomi and her husband and the 4 children and in-laws moved to outside the land of Israel because of the famine, and they die. All 3 of the men die, and at this point in the narrative, Naomi is making her way back to Beit Lechem, where she's from originally, and she says to her 2 daughters-in-law, "No, you've done enough." Naomi says to both Orpah and to Ruth, "It's great, thank you so much, but go back. I have no sons for you, and I'm not going to have any sons for you. So there's nothing here for you, right? You're here, go back and find husbands, and that's it." So they both say, "No way, we're staying with you. No matter what happens, we're staying with you." She keeps pushing them away, and then finally Orpah says, "Okay," and she leaves. And Ruth hangs on. And then Ruth continues to hang on. And Naomi presses her again to leave. And she says, "I'm not going." And there's these famous words here, if you look on the screen or in your book, in your sheets. Verse 15. So she said, meaning Naomi said, "See that your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law." She said this to Ruth. She said, "Orpah already left, so you go with her." But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. And these are the most famous words in the story. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may God do to me, if anything but death separates me from you." So these words, then, in the language of the rabbis, what they do with this is very similar to Nasav and Ishma. If you look at source 5, in the Midrashic expansion or the rabbinic expansion of the story, much later, of course, chronologically, the rabbis have a field day with this conversation. And Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn and not follow after you. It has been my intention anyway to convert." This becomes a story about Jewish, like it's not just relational, it becomes religious, right? I wanted to convert. I'm coming with you. So coming with you is not situated as I love you and I won't leave you, but I want to be a Jew, right? When Naomi heard this, she began to expound to her the laws of converts, and she said to her, "My daughter, It's not the custom of daughters of Israel to go to their theaters in other words, you can't have lobster anymore, right? Like she starts telling her, like, do you know what's entailed? She replied to her, wherever you go, I will go. Right? In other words, each phrase now becomes a statement of Naomi warning her about what she's about to get into. Right? It's gonna be like it's not, if you're gonna really be a Jew, we Jews don't go to the circus. We don't go to the theater. She said, okay, wherever you go, I'm gonna go. In other words, these simple words, poetic, powerful, like wherever you go, I will go is like wherever you go, I'm with you. Becomes wherever you Jew go, I will go. In other words, that doesn't scare me. She said, my daughter, it's not the custom of Israel to dwell in a house that does not have a mezuzah. She said, wherever you live, that's where I'm going to have a Jewish house. It's going to be like yours. Your people will be my people. These are the punishments and the warnings. And your God will be my God, the other mitzvah. In other words, the rabbis read the story of Ruth, which is relational, as a story analogous to what happens at Mount Sinai, where God says, Moses says, here are all the things you have to do. And the people don't say, well, give me the reasons. They say, whatever, like, I'm going. So to me, this is an answer to the question of what undergirds this is a sense of love and a sense of relationship. I love you, Naomi, I know you. Now, both David Kurtz and also Paul and others were like, oh, it's about fear here, and that's why it's being ratified, right? Scared, they're scared. The golden calf, that's all like the golden calf. Who could say no, right? Who could say no in the context of the golden calf? We saw what happened to those people. We're not going down that route. You set it up, God. You got us. We're your obedient servants. Enough with, giving us a zetz, like in the, Milgram studies. But here, it's more relational and love, right? It's rooted in, we know you, God. We love you. Whatever you ask us to do, we'll figure it out later, but we trust you, right? And I think that's, again, the dangers that Jay alluded to are there also. You can fall in love with somebody or be manipulated by somebody. Children are the most vulnerable when it comes to these things, obviously. And when Alice Miller wrote a book about obedience to authority, Prisoners of Childhood, and the drama of the child, she was essentially underscoring the dangers of a society that becomes fascistically, willing to be obedient to authority because authority is inerrant.
Yep.
Right. It's like what Bill Maher said last week about when the Pope called, he said that about, we have too much gay or whatever the term. He said, yeah, it's like, yeah, but he's always inerrant, right? He apologized, but wait. So there's this push-pull here in this dynamic and the danger of it and the shadow of it. But when it's rooted in love, it might be something else that's operative. And here's the last source, and then we're going to go to our friends online. And then here, it's from the late, great Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Last source in your sheet, source 11, the back of the page. Nasa v'nishma means we will do and then we will understand. From this, they derive the conclusion that we can only understand Judaism by doing it, by performing the commands and living a Jewish life. In the beginning is the deed. This is extremely right, right. This is
it's a fine engagement with
the Gospel of John, exactly. In the beginning was the word. Here is the beginning is the deed. Only then comes the grasp, the insight, the comprehension. This is extremely Zen, by the way, also. Like, this is where what Wendy was saying about the dangers of this. We can talk about this at great length, but when you talked about your yoga instructor, right? I said Beth talking about a yoga instructor. Thank you. Sorry. I have everybody in line in my head, but like Beth was talking about a yoga instructor, essentially, like what yoga instructor was saying, and here's where this gets so complicated, is that there is a deep truth in the order here, meaning you can't know love by understanding it abstractly, unless you love. It's like, remember that great scene in Good Will Hunting, where Will, the troubled, brilliant, right, student, is with this great therapist who starts talking about, because Will is the classic analysis. He's too scared. He's been hurt so deeply. He doesn't want to give himself to love and the therapist, Robin Williams, maybe his greatest moment as an actor, says like, talks about his wife's flatulence, right? She would go to bed at night and starts talking about the things that you love about people and the dark sides of them, and you can't know them from an idea. And he was making fun, and not making fun. He was trying to deconstruct the walls that Will had placed using his mind as a means for knowing the world. Like it's like you can't know Italy from reading about it or knowing every street in your Google Map head, right? So it's like you have to be in it to know it, right? And so just do it is this incredibly complicated paradox and dangerous. It's like that's the angels. God says, who revealed this mystery? Because angels, right, who have the proximity to God, right, they have, they're in some way they're saved from the danger. Like God is not going to use it, quote unquote, against the angels. But the danger of revealing a secret that it also can be manipulated. That's why the Midrash seems to be saying there's something, who revealed this is almost like it wasn't supposed to be revealed. It's secret knowledge, right? It's Zen, right? If you sit on the cushion to become enlightened, you will never be enlightened. If you do it because the agency of the mind is compelling you, it'll only get you so far. And so there's something that they're trying to allude to, which, like in the case of Bali Tshuva, like, I was an Orthodox kid growing up, but then I became uber religious for so many years. And it's exactly, you meet the moment where you're thinking, I fell in love, I got married, and then you promised me that I would then understand why I committed to you. But now it's 20 years into the marriage, and I jumped in, and I'm still not in love. So what's going on here, right? I still don't get it. I still don't understand why I'm separating the dishes. I still don't get. And you keep telling me, and you keep deferring meaning to some indefinite point, and that also is a manipulation of this great mystery, right? And so, Jonathan Sachs is trying to point to something true, right? The modern Western minds tend to put things in the opposite order. We seek to understand what we are committing ourselves to before making the commitment. That's fine when what's at stake is signing a contract, buying a new mobile phone, or purchasing a subscription, but not when making a deep existential commitment. The only way to understand leadership is to lead. The only way to understand marriage is to get married, right? The only way to understand whether a certain career path is right for you is to actually try it for an extended period. Those who hover on the edge of a commitment, reluctant to make a decision until all the facts are in, will eventually find that life has passed them by. So the only way to understand a way of life is to take the risk of living it. So na'asa v'nishma, we will do and we will understand eventually through extended practice and long exposure, we will understand. Now, I'm going to just open this up for the last couple of minutes. Nikki, if you'll wait, because I know that others had their hands up, like Adel and Asher Chaim, they'll come to you, Nikki, I promise. But this is also, I just don't want to leave this in a buttoned up, beautiful way, because of course, the upshot of this is you can still ask Rabbi Sachs, well, wait a second, how much, right? Like, this is almost like an advertisement for arranged marriage, right? And so like, wait a second, like, how do we hold the limited truth of Nasa and Ishma within a larger context of when it's appropriate, when it's not? Adel, Asher Chaim, Marilyn, Nikki, and then Thomas is going to take us home. Okay, Adel, go ahead.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos. Maybe you'll make it worse, which I love it. Great. Adel.
The first thing that comes up for me is leap of faith, connecting to what you were talking about, jumping in, and Beth, trust. And the second thing that comes up for me is na'aseh, as associating that with Asher bara Elohim la'asot. So God created the world for us to continue co-creating. So na'aseh, we will continue to co-create with you, and nishma, connecting that to the Shema and going back to Yaakov. So acknowledging our ancestors and our commitment to listen.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Nasa, the Nasa is Nasa is connected to the first Nasa in the Torah, which is when God consults with and uses that plural construct and says, "Let us make man." Because you're saying, "Let us" here is Nasa is God and us together partnering to finish the world, to co-create the world. And Nishma is then we will have a Shema that will listen deeply, will understand how that collectively we create the world together, like relating it to the Shema Yisrael. Beautiful. Okay, beautiful. Asher Chaim.
Thank you. I appreciate your bringing in Ruth because she is later in history. And as I read it, it's a return to an earlier trust and innocence. And I appreciate Paul's thought experiment of what if Na'aseh and Ishma came after the golden calf and the people were terrified of God's presence. But in terms of the order of stories in the Torah, the Na'aseh and Ishma happens before Sinai, before they've even seen the thunder and lightning, the fireworks of Sinai. They've experienced God's power through the 10 plagues as benevolent. And so far, there have only been a couple of minor rebellions where God has punished them, but not on a grand scale. So I wonder if the Na'aseh and Ishma is a sort of a more naive state, whereas later, as we get into the book of Bamidbar, they're going to be much more dovirai na provirai, trust but verify. Wait a minute. Before we go into the land, we want to hear a report from the spies, and maybe we want to vote Moses out of power and get new leaders. They become much more cynical. And so reading Ruth is like a balm that we still have within us, this capacity for Na'aseh and Ishma, for following, even though the model, of course, is someone coming from the outside. And
Right.
finally, maybe it is that transfusion of people who choose Judaism, who give us back our faith and our willingness to follow, like we did in the honeymoon before the golden calf.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think that, yeah, Shamati, and I think that it's just working with that chronology. It's also fascinating that the rabbis are deeply moved by that, right? That the rabbis themselves, one could argue that the rabbis are the ultimate rebels. I mean, it's not a stretch. And maybe for people here who haven't heard this, but like anybody who knows anything about the rabbinic project know that they arrogated to themselves the ability to create a new Torah to some extent. Right? We can argue about whether or not it's the rabbinic tradition is implicit or not in the text, but the rabbis saw themselves as those who who read things into the Torah that were not there and read things out of the Torah that are there, and it's really fascinating for you to bring Ruth as a kind of honeymoon period, as it were, or some kind of return or some second naivete, some would say. And one could see that the rabbis' valorization of Nasa v'Nishma as exactly their own aspiration. Would that they were also Nasa v'Nishma, right? Would that we could also just do and then understand. They spend so much of their time understanding. The whole entire Talmudic practice is come and listen, ta shma. Like they are like trying to understand the entirety of the tradition. And I love that you brought that. I think that's it's a good read, Asher Chaim. Very beautiful. Okay, so we had, I think, Marilyn quickly, and then Nikki, and then Thomas. Yeah, Marilyn?
Well, I was also thinking that, like, in a few parshot, what's coming up is the story of the spies. So I was thinking about, yep, we're just gonna listen, and but then, what are they committing to? What are they agreeing to first, following, and then listening? Because certainly when it's
Yeah,
like go
all
into
of
the
it.
ground, like go into the
Yeah,
land, it's like,
yeah,
I think we want to check it out first. And again, who are we listening to? Which spies are we going to listen to when we get the results? So
right.
it's, yeah, we'll follow all the commandments, but we're not going to blindly follow a commandment to go into the land or whatever. Anyways, it's what are we committing to?
Right. Yeah, that's the ultimate punishment, though. That's the one in which they lose the like God gives up at that moment, right? At that moment. And so in some way you could say that the obviously the two spies who verified what had already been told to them was true. Like the text wants us to believe, or it's cogent to imagine that 10 people telling them they can't go to land against God's voice is a bit of an absurd dynamic, right? Like the two, so anyway, so yes, it seems to be that they're all in on everything until they start reading the fine print. But yes, okay,
Yeah,
Nikki,
and just okay.
Nikki, yeah. Sorry, Mary, thanks. We got a Nikki and then
I
Tomas.
just wanted to point out how important this principle is in contemporary social engineering, and that it is the basis of all 12-step programs.
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it. Also, first do, and then you will understand.